This is Growth Guide, a podcast exploring the depths of curiosity, questioning everything in the name of growth. I'm your host, Brian D'Alessandro. Ron, thank you so much for joining me here today. So thrilled to have you here. As you know, I'm so inspired by your journey, your perspective, and all that you do here on Earth. We're going to get into some really great topics today.
It's my pleasure, Brian. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I guess the first place to start is probably space. How did that happen for you? How did you become an astronaut? Did you know when you were a kid?
Yeah, I've known that I wanted to be an astronaut since July 20th, 1969. And it was on that day where I, as a small boy, along with millions and millions of people all around the world, watched those first footsteps on the moon. And I don't think I would have been able to put it in these words at the time, but at some level, I realized that we had just become a different species. We were a species no longer confined to our planet. And I wanted to be a part of that group of explorers that had the opportunity to step off our planet and to really look back at our planet from that vantage point of space. And I kind of went the traditional route to NASA. I became a fighter pilot and then a test pilot, and then I was selected from the ranks of test pilots to start training as an astronaut.
And what was some of the training like?
The training was pretty intense. It's a very, we first started out with the space shuttle and learning how to fly the space shuttle. I was selected as a shuttle pilot. And it is an incredibly complicated, complex vehicle. And so basically, I was hired in 2000, in the class of 2000. And we all of us waited about 7 or 8 years. We trained for 7 or 8 years before any of us flew in space. And some of that was because we had the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster, and we stood down for a few years from flying. But that entire 7 or 8 years was spent training in simulators and classrooms, in aircraft, in underwater training. There was just so much training. And what's interesting is probably the majority of that training is for things that hopefully we would never do, and in fact we haven't done, or at least in my case I didn't do, and that's emergency situations and off nominal situations, as we call it, and things going really really wrong, and being able to be trained and understand exactly what to do if anything happens.
So wild. I also wonder how much of the different types of training have evolved since you went through your training into, today's current era of space travel. It's just such a fascinating and quickly changing area.
It is. Yeah, I think, I mean, I flew my last mission 10 years ago, actually, less than 10 years ago, because I'm coming up on the 10-year anniversary. Actually, by the time this airs, we would have had the 10th anniversary of my last space flight, the launch of my last space flight, which was a 6-month mission. So, we're not quite, it's less than 10 years since I flew last in space. And I think for the most part, a lot of the training that we got was very, very similar to the early days. We had some of the simulators were the same, and the buildings were the same, and the aircraft are the same. We flew the same T-38 aircraft as the Apollo astronauts, and so a lot of that was the same. But things even back then were starting to really change. The spacecraft were starting to change. The training methods were starting to change, and I think we are seeing a big evolution in the way we train people to fly to space.
Yeah, what are your what's your take on everything SpaceX is doing, and even Virgin Galactic? What's your take on some of these other enterprises?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think for a number of reasons. One reason is the more people that fly to space and more importantly get the experience of seeing our planet from space, the unifying experience of seeing our planet from space, the better off all of us here on the surface are going to be. But also, the more that operations can be turned over to commercial activities, particularly operations in low Earth orbit, the more the big government space agencies, NASA, the Canadian Space Agency, the European Space Agency, the Russian Space Agency, all of these space agencies can focus on what they've been chartered to do, and that's exploration. That's going, seeing what's over the next hill. And it's those organizations, those government organizations, that are particularly poised, if you will, to invest in things that will have a long-term return on investment, decades of return on investment. And commercial activities generally don't have, a 50-year time horizon for an ROI. So I think there's a really interesting partnership forming. It's already formed, but it's evolving and strengthening between the commercial private sector and the government sector in space exploration.
Such an exciting time to be, living here on this planet and witnessing so much of this taking place. You spoke about this refocus for the space agencies on exploration, which is really what I think captivates so much of us, so many of us, the idea of what's out there and the unknown. I mean, I have to ask, did you, in your own experience, come across anything that you would consider intelligent life out there?
On Earth or out in space?
Either one. No, in space.
No, no, nothing even close. Although the planet itself seems as if it's a living, breathing organism. I mean, when you look down at the planet from space and you're passing over it and orbiting it every 90 minutes and seeing a sunrise or a sunset every 45 minutes, and you're seeing, lightning storms on the surface rippling out like like nerves firing, neurons firing. And, you see this line slowly passing beneath you, where on one side is daytime and the other side is nighttime, and the auroras and all of the, it's just incredible. And it does look like a living, breathing organism that has its own intelligence to, and that, we call that Mother Nature or what, or whatever you want to call it, but it really gives you that impression. And I'm not sure that's not far off of the truth.
Mm, yeah, it's interesting. We call it Mother Nature, but the context changed whether we're sitting down here on Earth experiencing her versus being up there looking down. This idea of seeing the forest from the trees.
It really is seeing the forest, can't see the forest for the trees type of situation. And you know what I experienced from being physically detached from the planet was kind of a unique experience, because every experience of beauty that we have on the surface of the earth, gravity is pushing us into that scene, right? And so, like, if you're standing at the rim of the Grand Canyon and you're looking out over this just incredibly beautiful scene, you're experiencing the beauty of that scene, but you're inside the frame of the painting, right? You are part of that frame. Gravity is pushing you down into that frame. But when I was looking at the earth from space, I was outside of the frame of the picture, and that really, really changed everything. And one of the aspects of that is just the indescribable beauty of it. The changing colors and the motion, and we're traveling at 5 miles a second. We're traveling at 5 miles a second, but the Earth is just gently, silently gliding below us. And all those things that I talked about, all those weather phenomena and the sunrises and the sunsets, it's just indescribably beautiful. But what was really interesting about that experience, beyond the physical beauty of it, was being physically detached from the planet made me feel deeply interconnected and interdependent with everyone on it. And you don't need to go to space to realize that, but we live in a hyper interdependent world. And there is nothing that happens that doesn't affect everything else that happens, and it's a continuum of action and reaction. And I think this reality is becoming more and more clear to everybody. There's all these cliches. We're all in the same boat, and we're all in this together, and all these kind of cliches. But they're not cliches. They're actually the truth of the reality that we live in. And things like COVID-19, where literally every single person on the planet is affected in one way or the other from COVID-19, makes the point that we are all in this together is not a cliche. It is the true nature of our world. And this idea that we can do things in a vacuum, that what our actions and our decisions and our thoughts and words, what those do ripple out and affect everybody else for better or for worse. And so there's really this sensation of unity when you see the planet from the from the perspective of space. But the other side of the coin, so one side of the coin is the beauty of the planet, just the indescribable beauty of the planet. But the other side of the coin, and what hit me really forcefully, is the sobering contradiction between the beauty of our planet and life on our planet for a significant number of our planet's inhabitants. I think everybody realizes that a lot of times life on our planet is not as beautiful as it appears from space. There's so many challenges and problems that we face. People that don't have clean water to drink, enough food to eat, the poverty, the conflict that exists on our planet. And that was the overarching thing for me, is this feeling of injustice, that it doesn't have to be this way, that it's within our power to make life as approach the beauty that we see from space. And that became a call to action to me. And you talked about the overview effect, and the overview effect, which was beautifully laid out in the short film Overview, by our friend Guy Reed, is this idea that astronauts, after seeing the planet from space, look at things a little differently, right? The light bulb comes on that basically says, hey, we really are all in this together. We are interconnected and interdependent. We have this oasis out there in the blackness of space. We're all traveling through the universe together on this spaceship that we call Earth. That's the overview effect. But my first book is called The Orbital Perspective. And if the overview effect is that shift that astronauts have, then the orbital perspective is what you do with that shift. The orbital perspective is the call to action that comes from the overview effect. It's the refusal to accept the status quo on our planet. It's the acknowledgement that anything is possible, and if we can fly to space and go to the moon and do all the other things that we're doing, then we can, for instance, lift the entire population of the world out of destitute poverty. We can, make sure that nobody dies from preventable, incurable diseases. We can make sure that everybody's educated and everybody has access to clean water and everybody has enough food to eat. That is well within our abilities to do that. And part of the path to get there is to realize our true underlying implicit wholeness, our true unity. That's very
Mm.
obvious from the vantage point, obvious and undeniable from the vantage point of space. And what that equates to, when you bring in the orbital perspective, is that if some natural disaster happens or something happens on the other side of the world, and you're an altruistic person, and you say, oh, those poor people over there, how can I help? The point is that you're not really being altruistic any more than you're being altruistic to your hand when you pull it back from a hot stove. It's not those poor people over there. That's happening to us. That's happening to us, not just as a species, but as a continuum of, of living beings, that we refer to as persons, uh, that have this, really, really implicit underlying unity that is usually just beyond our perception.
Yeah, and this oneness that you speak of is something that I've heard, through films and yourself and astronauts who have experienced from outer space, also from people who have experiences through either religion, meditation, or plant medicine. So many ways where some people tap into that. I guess the question I have is, if the solution is for more people to experience this so that they can feel more connected and take action upon this oneness, how can every person experience orbital perspective? Is there a way that you have.
Yeah, and I mean, you named a whole bunch of them right there, but the key thing, and what what the main tenets of my first book, The Orbital Perspective, is you don't have to be in orbit to have the orbital perspective. It's not an excuse. You can't say, "Well, I've never been to space, so I don't realize that," because it is everybody already knows it. It's 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 whether or not you bring it up to your conscious awareness, and it's whether or not you admit it, and it's whether or not you have the selflessness to act in accordance with that reality that you know to be true. So I don't think I'm saying anything that people don't already know, that we're interconnected and interdependent, and we're all in this together. And it's not a kumbaya thing. Let's, we are the world type thing. It's the underlying reality of our world, and we have some really critical challenges and problems that we face. And the only way that we're going to solve these real problems and real challenges is in the context of the real world. And the context of the real world is that we are all interconnected and interdependent, and no single organization or corporation or nation will be able to, on their own, solve these problems. It's going to take a profoundly collaborative inter awareness and embracement of our interdependent reality.
Yeah, and I would even venture to add on to that that the more we can do this outside of the intellect and in this, this sense and feeling space, that's where the real impact comes. Because when, like you said, we all know it, and it's easy to intellectualize and to kind of see it on paper and be like, yeah, that makes sense. But to actually be inspired to act upon it, because we're living in a society where there are systems in place that are out of alignment with this premise. And my belief is the way to evolve that is to see another way and to start to work with others to create solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I think acting on intuition, I think, is what you're getting towards, is a very powerful tool. And how I think the best way to do that is to get out of the to get your ego out of the way. And one of the things, maybe a good way to describe what needs to be done is to talk about legacy, right? Because a lot of people, everybody talks about, not everybody, but most people talk about, that what we need to do in life is leave a legacy, right? I mean, I mean, there's people that talk about, getting their share of the pie, and live a very, very seemingly selfish life, and are just out for their own. But even the people that you would classify as altruistic, maybe they've started a nonprofit, maybe they do development work in sub-Saharan Africa, maybe they give to charity and are philanthropists. What's important there is why they're doing it. And if they're doing it because they, even, in the most accepting terms, it's to leave a legacy. I want to leave something behind that shows everybody that I was here, right? Um, and if you think about that, though, if you look at that from the orbital perspective, so one of the aspects of the orbital perspective, and I go into a really deep level of this in my new book, Floating in Darkness, is a concept called a dolly zoom. And in a dolly zoom, and I borrow this from cinematography, it's where the camera is dollied or rolled back at the same time and at the same rate as the lens is zoomed in, right? And it was used in Jaws and Vertigo and all these films, and
Oh
it
yeah.
challenges the viewer's view of reality. It gives height and depth to the scene. And so we need to dolly zoom our lives. We need to dolly zoom these situations. And by dolly zooming, and we were zooming out to the widest geographic area as we can, ideally the entire planet. Uh, um, Maybe in a few decades it'll be the entire universe, but right now we could be happy with the entire planet. But we do that without losing the worm's eye details on the ground. We zoom out to the point where we can see the whole picture without people being turned into numbers on a spreadsheet or a consumer group or whatever, right? They maintain their value as valued members of our human family. But there's also a temporal aspect to it. And the temporal aspect is we want to zoom out to the long-term effects, multi-generational effects of a decision, of a policy, of a course of action. What's going to happen to what is this decision going to do to the lives of our great great grandchildren, right? But as we zoom
Mhm.
out to that long term, we can't lose the short term. But right now we're almost completely focused on the short term, the next shareholder report, the next election cycle, which are important. Those things, I'm not saying those things are not important, but you can't abandon the long term for the short term, and you can't abandon the short term for the long term. So let's go back to legacy. So leaving this legacy as defined as, letting people know that I was here and I've made an impact, I left my mark on the world. When you zoom out, when you dolly zoom out to the orbital perspective, creating a legacy like that kind of blurs into insignificance, right? Because every world leader, every movie star, every corporate giant, every great artist or poet will eventually be a historical footnote at most. When 200,000 years pass, even the physical things we build, every pyramid, every great cathedral will eventually be reduced to dust. But when you look at legacy from the orbital perspective, what you realize is that every word, every action, everything that you do on a minute to minute basis ripples out and not only affects the trajectory of your own life, but the trajectory of our entire society. And the way I like to describe that is, imagine that a planet killing asteroid was coming towards the Earth, and this asteroid is so big that if it hit the Earth, it would destroy life on the planet. Every living thing on the planet would be destroyed. If we knew about that asteroid far enough out, we wouldn't have to send Bruce Willis and a a team of heroes to go blow it to smithereens. We could send a small spacecraft, and with the force equivalent to the weight of a feather, just give it a little bit of nudge. And that little bit of nudge over the course of the entire journey towards the Earth could result in thousands of miles of mist distance, saving every living thing on the planet. And so every word, every action, every thought, every deed that we do on a minute to minute or second to second basis ripples out, uh, and nudges the trajectory of our own lives and the trajectory of our society. So what that means is where our world will be and where it would have been had you not lived 100,000 years ago are vastly different. And so leaving a legacy from that point of view doesn't require that we get credit for it. It's irrelevant, the credit that we get. And so what trips everybody up on creating real good is spending so much of their effort to ensure that whatever they do, they're going to get the credit for it. So what that does is it impedes collaboration. It leads to duplication of effort. It leads to all kinds of problems in problem solving. It introduces problems into the problem solving process, and slows us down and impedes our progress.
Would you say that on some level, even if momentarily, transcending our ego is really the key to um, progress here?
Yeah, it's the key to even if you could transcend it for a second and you get a
Mhm.
glimpse into that, I think that starts a chain reaction that leads to that understanding.
Yeah, because when you were talking about legacy, it was interesting. What was coming up for me is this kind of idea that legacy for a lot of people is really about some form of immortality. It's I'm
Exactly.
not
Yeah.
at right. I'm
It's an
not at
immortality project. It's an immortality project. Yeah.
and it's a fallacy without a doubt, but
Yeah.
for the individual pursuing it, they think it's going to keep them alive and it's going to keep on going. And what I love about the concept of orbital perspective is once you are, as in your teaser for the new book, you're not from planet Earth, you're of planet Earth. And
Right.
that notion where you are part of this larger organism, everything you're doing to serve the organism is actually feeding into your immortality. so so
Yeah.
if that
Uh,
is what you're looking to achieve, you can potentially do it by supporting the health and livelihood of the planet and of the species in some way.
well, I mean, if you want to go even deeper than that, one of a requirement to seek immortality through immortality projects is the notion that you are mortal. So versus life being a continuum,
Hmm.
and which is a whole nother topic that we could discuss if you want.
Yeah, that is a big one. I know. I just read a book, the Immortality Key, and it's all about the religion with no name, and dying, the concept of dying before you die, and that is the key to immortality, to experience. And they're saying exactly what you're saying by going to outer space. If you can experience the universe as not just being your life, then you never really die, because you know that you're continually a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's worth talking a little bit about this idea of a continuum, right? Because
Absolutely.
we feel like, I mean, let's look at the, since we're talking about space, let's look at the Earth for a second. And so we all kind of think that we live on this planet. It's called Earth, and we're here on Earth. We're on it. We're not of. Most people don't think that they're of it. They don't think, you know, that it's. They don't think that it's part of them. They've just been plopped onto the surface of this rock that we call Earth, and that there's this membrane, there's this line, this boundary that separates Earth from the rest of the universe. There's just this dark, cold vacuum of space, for millions and millions of miles before the next rock. And what's interesting, when I launched into space and I looked back at the Earth, the most striking thing and the most immediately striking thing was how thin the atmosphere is. It's just this incredibly thin, paper thin atmosphere, and it's sobering to think that that's what protects every living thing on the planet and keeps us alive. But if you think about that line, I just called it a line. I called it a paper thin line. In reality, there is no line. It's a continuum, right? The higher you go, the farther you get away from the surface of the planet, the less and less dense the atmosphere becomes. But there's no line. There's nothing that separates Earth from the rest of the universe. It's a continuum,
Mm.
right? And there's all of these things that we think are distinct, right? Discrete, that in reality are continuums. If you like this moment in time, right? There is no line where on one side of the line is the past, the other side of the line is this moment, and another line where at one side of the line is this moment, and the other side of this is the future. It's a continuum. It's an eternal now, right? It's an ever present and eternal now. Same thing with the word here. We think, okay, here, I think I'll define here as within the walls of this room, right? But everywhere you've ever been was described as here, and everywhere everyone has ever been is described as here. And so there is no boundary between here. There's only one here, right? And it extends through infinity, right? And so the reason why I'm bringing all this up is we also think there's distinct things called persons, right? Which
Mm.
is true. I mean, to an extent, each of us has our own individual personalities and lives and everything else. And but I contend that there's no membrane that separates us from everybody else. There is a membrane on our body called the skin, but your existence extends beyond your body, right? Your conscious awareness extends beyond your body, and extends out into a field of consciousness, which is uniform and unit. I shouldn't say uniform. It's unified, and so we are connected on that deeper level. Much much beyond the physicality of DNA, right? And this notion of one human family is a true notion. I mean, literally, if you go back far enough, every single person on the planet had the same mother and father. So we are literally a family. We are literally related to each other. But that connection extends beyond like I said, the physicality of DNA. There's this other level that is transcends the body, I guess.
Yeah, and it always begs to ask the question of, um, if these boundaries are somewhat of an illusion, then what is the driving force that holds these atoms together in each of their forms?
What's the
Is it
driving force?
consciousness? Is it something else?
Well, that presupposes that those atoms are actually there.
True. And they might be here and not at the same time, which
Right,
I,
right.
I love what's been, coming out the past 10 years in the quantum physics realm,
Exactly.
because,
Yeah.
science and spirit seems to be really,
Merging. Yeah.
that line. Yeah, that line. Well, and I think we might learn that there actually isn't a line
Yeah.
between the two. It's the
Or
same thing.
a line between science and religion and spirituality, and all those.
Hmm.
I think all those lines are going to hopefully become more and more transparent, and then eventually disappear.
It almost seems like two sides of the same coin. When I look at the problem that exists in our world that is threatening our existence, um, the exact solution that we need in order to be able to hopefully resolve it seems to be just that, is,
Yeah,
blurring,
dissolving those lines. Yeah,
dissolving. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, no, that's it. What establishes those lines is called ego. And we I mean, that word has been kind of put in a little container. Ego is somebody who thinks that if you have ego, that means you think you're better than everybody else. But I think in its most basic thing, ego is what you identify as yourself, right?
Hmm.
It's who you think you are, right? And most people identify themselves as their thoughts and their feelings and their sensations, and don't integrate into their definition of who they are, that there's somebody that realizes that you're having a thought, that there's somebody who's aware of your awareness, that there's somebody who's
Mm.
aware of your sensations and your feelings and everything else. But we get lost in this idea that we are those things, not the entity that is aware of those things.
Mm. And that further just binds us to these false problems that we've created in front of us, and it's so easy to kind of occupy our focus and our attention on this destructive nature rather than a solution. And I guess I'd love from this place to kind of shift gears over to what you're doing with the floating into darkness book, because it sounds like we're hitting some of those topics, but I'd love for you to kind of lay that out a little bit more, because I love that you're always also about, here's the concept, but here's how to put it into action.
Yeah. So what I've done in Floating in Darkness, and it's coming out May 4th, but we're doing a big pre-order campaign before that, is to basically use an autobiographical narrative. And in this case, the story of my life. So I've used the story of my life and key events that happened in my life. I fought in combat. I've ejected from an F-16, less than a second before I would have been killed. I've lived on the bottom of the ocean. I've flown in space. And and what's interesting is it's an autobiographical narrative that is written in first person present tense. And it's so it's going to read like a novel. So you're experiencing it as it's happening. And the autobiographical, I don't know how much I want to give away, but the autobiographical narrative starts pretty much at the absolute beginning. So that's all I'll say about that. But the point of it wasn't to write an autobiography. The point wasn't to write a memoir. The point was to use the evolution of my own worldview, for lack of a better word, my own perspective, to serve as an allegory for the evolution of society. So, just as I, started out very tribal, and my universe didn't extend beyond the Hudson River in New York, um, as I experienced all those things that I talked about, that worldview eventually evolved, and the language throughout the book evolves. So language that I use in the beginning of the book, I would never use now, and
Hmm.
uh, descriptions that I use in the beginning of the book have been, updated and expanded and evolved, throughout the book. And so just as each individual life can serve as an allegory for the evolution of society, where, you start out, very self-centered and ultimately self-centered, where you don't even know that anything else exists, to becoming more aware of the unifying reality of the universe. Um, Society started out with bands of hunter-gatherers, and eventually evolved into religions and nation states and everything else. And we, one of the points that I make is that we are at an inflection point right now. We are at the critical crossroads like never before. And so humanity is on this evolutionary process. And the first giant leap of evolution was when we became self-aware, when we realized that we were a living, independent living thing whose conscious mind can extend backwards or forwards billions of years, can make an estimate of what would happen in the future. When that happened, we became human, right? And that, I describe it in the book as the first inhale of our evolution, right? And when you inhale, you take in, you become, and everything else. But we can only inhale for so long before we have to exhale, and it's time to exhale. And when we exhale, we let go, we give up. And so the next giant leap of evolution, which we are right in the middle of right now, is realizing that the self that we are self-reflecting on is not just an individual, it's part of a larger cosmic journey. And so that is one of the key tenets of the book, and one of the threads that I pull on quite a bit.
Amazing. It reminds me of some of the work, done a little while back by Edgar Mitchell, the
Mhm.
astronaut, and
Yeah.
his field of noetics, right?
Right. Yep.
This notion of and did he coin the holographic universe? Is that?
I'm not sure.
But that notion also of, and as you talk about that first inhale where we became aware, and especially aware of time, there's this guy Timothy Wilkins who writes about these different forms of binders, and different life is bound by a different attribute. So plants are energy bound; they're energy binders. They're bound by the relationship to the sun. Animals, being space binders, they're bound by the ability to move through space. And humans being time binders, being that we're bound by our relationship to time.
Yeah.
And as you talk about this inhale, exhale, I question on that next inhale, can we transcend this, this enslavement to time, and move beyond it, where we're out of this linear thinking, which
Yeah.
I think it's a tool we should still have access to. But when we define our reality by this linear practice, it certainly feeds the ego
Yeah.
in a big way.
It was
But
created by the ego.
yeah, right, exactly, yeah. So um, yeah, I wonder what that looks like, and stepping
Yeah.
out of being bound by time.
So I also spend a lot of time in Floating in Darkness talking about the nature of time, and how it's not just this linear arrow of time going from the past to the future, that there is a orthogonal, there's a perpendicular dimension that is, and the intersection, which is infinite and eternal, and the intersection is what we call the now, is now. Now is the interface, the doorway between the finite linear and the exponential eternal.
Wow, I can't wait to read the book. So I know in one of your videos you speak about transcending the matrix.
So basically, where that comes in the book is I share a story about not a disagreement I had while I was on the space station with how a particular task should be done. And I tried as best I could to explain that the way they wanted it to be done couldn't be done because of the configuration, the actual real world configuration on board the space station. And they never could come to terms with that. They could never agree with it. They would. And so what they did is we both came at it from different starting conditions, right? They thought that one objective reality existed, and I knew, because I could see it, I was there, that another objective reality. And I couldn't fathom why they couldn't see it from my point of view, since I'm the one that's
Mm,
actually there, and the reason why they couldn't arise above the problem is because they were part of the problem. They were inside the problem, and they couldn't rise above it. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu, there's a quote from him that basically says, I'm paraphrasing now, I won't get it exactly right, but basically accepting reality is the only place from which true change can occur. We we have to acknowledge what actually is before we can have progress, right? And so I equate that to a scene in the Matrix where Morpheus is talking to Neo and saying, see all the people, the bankers, the carpenters, the, you know they're the very minds of the people that we're trying to save, but until they're outside the Matrix, they're going to try and stop us because they're inside the Matrix. They don't see that. And so you know going to space is a transcendental experience, right? You're outside the physical boundaries of space, which actually don't of the Earth, which actually don't exist. But in our minds, we think that we're outside of that boundary, right? And so there's so many ways to step outside of that and to look in. We talked about, even for a second, if you can transcend your own ego and realize that you're not your thoughts and your experiences and your memories and your feelings, and that you're that which is aware of it, just for even a millisecond starts a chain reaction, right? And
mm-hmm.
so meditate. You talked about meditation. In meditation, what are we doing? We're becoming the silent watcher of thoughts, right? Of our own thoughts, right? And so the secret to this whole thing is to be able to get outside and look in, to step outside of the Matrix and look in. I forget what color pill it is, but take the take the
Mm-hmm.
correct color. So and then see how far that rabbit hole goes.
I love it. Yeah, and as you kind of nodded to before, there's no one path. You can find that through so many different modalities, and it doesn't matter which gets you
In
there.
reality, there's no path. You're already there. All you
Hmm.
have to do is get out of your own way. You
Hmm.
can't take a step towards it because you're already there. So
uh, you're on that map that says you are here, yet you're looking for where you are.
yeah, yeah,
Oh. From there in the book, you talk about being one on the launch pad
yeah,
towards unity.
yeah.
Do you want to touch on that a bit?
Yeah, that's a really fun story because it's a story about emerging beauty in places that you didn't expect it. So the scene is that I'm on the launch pad in Kazakhstan on the 50th anniversary of the first launch of a human to space, Yuri Gagarin's launch in 1961. And we were there on the 50th anniversary on the very same launch pad that he launched from. And before we climbed into the rocket, we were on the base of the launch pad, and we're at this previous top secret Soviet military installation. You got to realize that I was a Cold War fighter pilot. 26 years in the military, fought in combat. I spent the first 15 years of my adult life training to fight the Russians, and here I am at the base of this rocket that's going to launch me and two Russian military officers into space for 6 months. And I look up at the rocket, and there's an American flag and a Russian flag side by side, and that really hit me because that was a perfect example, really emotional example of the power of setting aside our differences and embracing our true unity, right? The true underlying unity. So now fast forward, we're in the rocket. We've been there for a few hours. Our knees are in our chest. We're in these custom molded cocoons, these seats and each of us was asked to pick a few songs that the Russian launch personnel can pipe into the spacecraft to pass the time. And one of my songs was U2's One. And so the song, it was getting me very emotional, right? Because of the beauty of the song, right? And I understood where that beauty was coming from when I thought about the lyrics, because the lyrics are all about our unity, right? And that's a really beautiful concept. One life, one blood. We got to carry each other, and all these lyrics in the song were really beautiful. But the underlying melody was also beautiful, and I found myself dissecting. Okay, what's happening? There was a radio carrier wave that was coming from the launch control center that embedded in that carrier wave was these frequencies that, went into my headset, and that radio frequency was converted to electric signals that vibrated a diaphragm that created sound waves, or waves of sound that impacted my eardrum. My eardrum converted that to electrical signals that went to my brain, and somehow that that indicated beauty to me, right? That was something beautiful to me. And then I started to dissect it further, and I'm like, well, what is beautiful about this? And what dawned on me is that it's a collection of individual notes, right? Each note is its own frequency. And could it be that each of us is like the individual notes in the song of the universe, right? So each note
Mm.
only lasts for a specific point of time, but the contribution of that note lasts for the entire song, right? And each note by itself might not be beautiful, but the beauty of the overall song itself would not be possible without that individual note, right? And so
It's
we become,
relational.
yeah, so we become two dolly zoom sides of the same coin. We're distinct individuals, but we're also the universe, right? Because we're part of the song of the universe, of the symphony of the universe. And so, that's another way to look at what we've been talking about throughout this conversation, is that both are true. You're both an individual, discrete, life form, or whatever, however you want to describe it. But you're also and it's not that I'm a universe and you're a universe. It's that we're the same universe. We're one, and that's why that song was so powerful, sitting there getting ready to launch to space for 6 months.
Hmm. I mean, you paint such a beautiful image always of the experience you're sharing, and you can feel it and sense it so deeply. And I appreciate that, and I'm really excited to read the book for that reason. I think it's going to be a great time, and at the right time, because
Yeah.
we're certainly, as you touched on, at this critical moment. And this is something I'm really, as an entrepreneur and just as a human being, fascinated by this dilemma of, we can have these experiences, these feelings, these beliefs, this knowing, yet the grooves are so deep in our day to day that it's so easy to get sucked back into the current paradigm. Any thoughts on how to, really, really create new grooves, or consistently make those shifts?
Yeah, I think we all inherently know when we're, for lack of a better word, going with the flow, right? We're on the path that we're supposed to be on. I'm an entrepreneur as well. I've launched successful for-profit and nonprofit organizations, and it all comes down to intention, right? And what is the intention of doing these things? And I think one of the most powerful forces on the planet is business enterprise. And businesses can either save our world by putting us on the right path and serving society, or it can destroy our world by becoming, solely self-interested entities operating in a vacuum, right? A self-serving vacuum, right? And I think instead of businesses being those self-centered organizations, they can see themselves as interdependent nodes in a fabric of prosperity, right? We went back, we were talking before about how, the ego is one of the things that really holds us back. But I think this other thing is this idea that there's not this interdependency, right? That we can do it on, we can operate in a vacuum. And so I think entrepreneurship, business enterprise that is focused first and foremost on serving the needs of society, um, are going to be the successful businesses of the future and are going to save the planet. And I think those organizations and corporations and businesses that have secretive practices and take a wholly proprietary mindset, and seek profit maximization at all costs, they're actually gonna see themselves being left behind, and they're because they're not gonna keep up with the economic growth that true collaborative, true open, transparent collaborative business entities that are focused on serving the needs of society are going to bring about. And those
Mm.
companies are going to have to adapt, evolve, and take on more cooperative practices and mindsets in order to survive. And at least I hope that's the way it's going to go, because if it doesn't
Well,
go that way, there's disasters on the other side.
I kind of think it has to, right? Yeah, it's one way or the other. But I mean, the beauty here is that the same way you're speaking about the dilemma for our business entities is the exact same dilemma on the individual level. And we've
Exactly.
been
Yeah.
talking about. I mean, there's this theme that we're kind of spinning around of as above, so below, and it's all the same. And these illusions of boundaries, and whether it be in the human body or the whole species or these entities, I think it's all containers and contents. And the container is not good or bad, it's what we put in there and what we fill it with, and
Yeah.
that then fills the container as well. And so with these business entities, yeah, I mean, the more that the humans that are engaging on that level are realizing this and working out of integrity and with intention, as you said, the more these entities start to take on those values and those characteristics. And so it's kind of this thing of like, where do you start, chicken or the egg? And I think it's in some ways everywhere.
Well,
I think that certainly on the individual level, like, yeah, do the work internally, but also some people are very tactile and learn experientially. And so,
yeah.
okay, learn by creating and evolving how you create. I mean, that's a whole other way to make the shift as well.
Right. I think another thing to bring into the conversation, especially since we're talking about entrepreneurship, is, we talked about how the ego gets in the way. But the other thing, one of the tools that the ego uses is this idea of scarcity, right? That we live in a scarcity based existence, that, I need to get as much as I can from you, because, it's more important that I get it. And there's only so much to go around. And if I give you something, that's less than I have to that I will have. And so, I think coupled with this idea that businesses exist first and foremost to serve the needs of society in an interdependent fabric of prosperity, is this idea that we don't live in a scarcity. We enter into the post scarcity world, right? Which I believe is coming. Where, it's the old saying is, grow the pie, or, float, rising tide lifts all boats, and all that. Again, just like we're all in this together. Yeah, it's a cliche, but it's a true. But it's that, just because it is a cliche doesn't mean it's not true. And these are also true statements, even though they've been used as cliches. And that's what we should be striving for, is growing the pie.
Ron, what is the question I should be asking you that I'm not?
You just did. No, I appreciate everyone who's out there who's listening to this, that are working towards helping to make life as beautiful as it looks from space. And that, maybe one thing, just real quick, one other topic that we could talk about right now is just how divisive and polarized the world is right now.
Mm.
And and the reason why I want to bring it up is because I want to ask people to help change that. Um, and one of the ways we can change that is by realizing the true nature of what's going on, right? And realizing that we've all been placed into our little containers with echo chamber walls that feed us exactly what um, the the algorithms think we need to hear, right? Because people are making money off uh, that algorithm. And so we we're constantly bombarded, left and right, by divisive rhetoric coming from all sides, right? And I know that there's a lot of fatigue in being able to fact check everything that comes your way, right? How could you possibly fact check everything? You can't. You can't possibly fact check everything. But what we need to realize is, first of all, that we are being manipulated. We're being manipulated for commercial reasons, and to recognize that manipulation when it happens. And so if you see something on your feed or on the news or whatever it is that gets you all riled up and makes you want to send out a post or send out a tweet or whatever it is, realize in all likelihood you're being manipulated right now, that they purposely pushed some button to elicit that response that you are so eager to do, right? And so what a suggestion that I would give is, if you feel that urge to put something out there, that's when the responsibility to fact check comes in. That's where the responsibility is, to say, hey, before I put this out into the world, I'm going to figure out where this is. Are these really facts? Did this really happen? Is this being blown out of proportion? Is this being exaggerated? What is the intended result that I'm trying to get? If it's to make myself feel better because it's reinforcing a worldview that I may or may not be able to prove is exists, then that's something to think about, because these are the most divisive times I remember in my life, and unfortunately technology is driving some of that. And so this is some of the downsides of our technological advancement is, anything, whether it's a car or a gun or whatever, can be used for good or bad. And same thing can be said for social apps and things like that.
Thank you so much, Ron. And again, I want to thank you so much for joining me here today. For everyone out there who is dying to get the book as much as I am, if you go to floatingindarkness.com/order, you can pre-order the book, and Ron is giving everyone 15% off. So just use the code GROWTH at checkout, and you can pre-order the book, and it'll be there right on release. Thank you so much, Ron.
Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
Thanks for joining us this week on Growth Guide. A big thanks to our sponsors. This episode is sponsored by Project New You. I'm a huge fan of their Nitrovite nootropic brain supplement. It's helped me to develop laser focus, a better memory recall, and motivation. Nitrovite has helped me in launching this podcast amongst completing many other projects. Visit growthguide.love/focus to learn more and use promo code GROWTH for 15% off. This episode is also sponsored by the upcoming film Thrive 2. This is what it takes. A follow-up to the 2011 hit Thrive, which is one of the most widely viewed documentaries in history with over 90 million views. If creating a better world matters to you, don't miss it. Visit growthguide.love/thrive. Make sure to visit our website, growthguide.love, where you can find freebies, exclusive content, and subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode. If you found value in listening, I'd really appreciate a rating on iTunes. I can't tell you just how important this is. Or spread the love. Tell your friends, your fam, heck, tell your spirit animals. And follow me on Instagram at growthguide.love. Be sure to tune in next week for our newest episode.